Now, the loss of the Liberal government in Victoria comes at the end of a bad week for the federal government after confusion over the Medicare co-payment and controversy over comments made by the Defence Minister.
Joining us from Melbourne now is the Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister, Josh Frydenberg. Good morning to the program, Mr Frydenberg.
Nice to be with you, Eliza.
Now, is your government to blame for the loss in Victoria overnight?
Oh, absolutely not. This election was fought on state issues. If you look at the polls, they've been consistently against the Baillieu and Napthine government for around 3 years. We started slowly in Victoria upon taking office in 2010. Obviously, we had the changeover of leadership in early 2013. We had the shenanigans of the Jeff Shaw issue. We had the barnacle of the paramedics dispute. It was not a state election fought on federal issues. It was a state election fought on state issues. There's some good lessons for us, but I believe Denis Napthine and his team can hold their head high. Not only do they run a good campaign, but they have a very, very good record.
The former Premier, Jeff Kennett, has blamed you, though. He's called your government a shambles.
Well, you'd expect that from Jeff because he actually also went to print earlier last week and rated the Napthine government 8 out of 25 and the Andrews opposition as 5 out of 25. So, you know, Jeff can't have it both ways, to rate down the incumbents and then also to criticise us federally. Look, the polls have consistently been against the coalition here in Victoria. And if you want to look at other state governments around the country, just look at Mike Baird. He's 10 points in front in New South Wales, and in Queensland, Campbell Newman's 8 points in front. So it'll be interesting to see if Bill Shorten joins those leaders on the stage, if or his Labor colleagues in both Queensland and New South Wales on the stage, if they lose those state elections.
Yet the point that Jeff Kennett and other Liberals have made is that Victoria has been on the receiving end of some bad deals by the federal government, essentially, in Victoria. They're copying perhaps the worst of it. Certainly as far as jobs are concerned, they're concerned down there. And taxes, I mean, we've heard about the GP tax clearly, university degrees, cuts to pensions, petrol taxes. Their point is this is all counted against the incumbent government in Victoria.
Well, hang on. Tony Abbott and Joe Hockey were prepared to write a $3 billion cheque for Victorians for the East-West Link. This is a project that was popularly received by all polled Victorians. It was actually more popular than both the Napthine government and the Andrews opposition. And it's very telling that Dan Andrews did not mention the East-West Link in his remarks last night. We've got an upper house now in Victoria, 40 members in the upper house, where we could have up to 11 crossbenchers, 5 Greens, 3 from the Shooters Party, Liberal Democrats and Democrat Labor Party. It could be a real problem for the Andrews government, while they may have a majority in the lower house. To actually get their legislation through the upper house could be very difficult, Andrew, and they could be up for a lot of compensation if they try to rip up these contracts and introduce the dark spectre of sovereign risk into Victoria.
Josh Frydenberg, we just welcome our ABC viewers as we talk about the result in Victoria yesterday. You mentioned that Daniel Andrews didn't mention the East-West Link. I mean, does that tell you that perhaps those local issues weren't the deciding factor in this?
Well, obviously, you know, the East-West Link, I think, was an issue which Andrews lost votes on rather than won votes on, and he's in a very difficult position now because we do have signed contracts and we don't want to see the dark spectre of sovereign risk introduced into Victoria. And Tony Abbott's made it very clear that that $3 billion federal cheque will not be going to other projects. It's for the East-West Link and the East-West Link alone. And Bill Shorten, as we've pointed out in the Parliament last week, actually supported the East-West Link in writing when Sir Rod Eddington first called for submissions on the project.
Mr Frydenberg, you're putting a pretty good spin on it this morning, but it is the first time a first-term government has lost in 60 years. The coalition in Victoria must be devastated.
Yeah, sure. We are devastated because the Napthine government had a very good record. They were the only state in the country to have a AAA credit rating and budget surpluses over the forward estimates.
So what went wrong? What went so wrong?
Well, I think your reporter pointed to it earlier. I think we could have done better in selling both our record and also pointing out the dangers that were were a factor in terms of bringing in Daniel Andrews, because we are going to see an emboldened union movement in Victoria. As a result, we'll see more lawlessness on our building sites and falling productivity. So there are big dangers in an Andrews government, and we have to continue to point that out. It has to also be said that the Labor Party energised their union base very, very effectively. You had firefighters in uniform, paramedics in uniform on election booths, making phone calls.
Sorry to interrupt you, but Labor run a better campaign. Is that what you're saying?
Of course. I mean, you have to say that, because they won the prize on the night, and they won the key seats, namely those Sandbelt seats. Bentley, Carrum, Mordialloc, all of which look like falling to the Labor Party. So they did run an effective campaign. They used social media effectively, and they also energised their union movement, who were out there in force, it has to be said.
Does it also tell you voters don't like destabilisation? Obviously, we saw the leaders change from Ted Baillieu to Dennis Napthine. We saw what happened federally against the Rudd and Gillard governments. Was there a case in Victoria that the Liberal Party simply wasn't ready or prepared to govern?
Oh, well, I certainly think we were ready to govern. I mean, we had a good record and we were doing good things. But you're right, disunity is death in politics, and when you change leaders mid-term, that really compromises your message. And, Dennis Napthine has to be congratulated for the hard work he did in just the 20 months he was leader. But there are some serious lessons for us. We'll go back to the drawing board. We obviously have to look at those federal Victorian seats, which are marginal, and ensure that we hold on to them at the next federal election. But also at a state level, with the fact is, in today's political climate, you can turn over governments much more quickly than maybe in the past. And so we believe we're a real chance at the state level to win government again in 4 years' time.
You speak about communicating the message in government. Now, yesterday I noticed in The Australian, Paul Kelly was quite critical, and a number of Conservative commentators have been very critical about Tony Abbott's inability to make a very clear message about what the purpose is of this federal government. I mean, do you take that as a lesson? Does the federal government have to do more to argue its narrative?
Look, I look at the polls and I can see the work that we've got to do, and we are listening, and we will recalibrate our message, Eliza, as a result. But Tony Abbott is one of the best communicators around. Don't forget, at the last election he had a thumping victory, and Labor got the worst primary vote in 100 years. I mean, think about that, the worst primary vote in 100 years. And he, over and over again, he talked about repairing Labor's mess, stopping the boats, and abolishing the carbon tax. Now, we have done more than we've been given credit for in just our first year. But just like Dan Andrews is going to find out in his upper house, we've had a tough time in our upper house, and that is frustrating us as we try to get our budget repair measures through.
But do you feel as though there is some confusion in your ranks, and perhaps the public is confused? Certainly when we look at the issue of the GP co-payment, what are the public to make of that?
Well, we've always said that the GP co-payment is a good policy for a number of reasons. Firstly, we already have co-payments when it comes to the PBS, and that has been supported by the Labor Party. We remember Bob Hawke, when he was Prime Minister, put forth a co-payment for GP similar to this. Medicare needs to be sustainable over the long term if people are going to get access to the best health services, and we've seen a dramatic increase in Medicare spending from $8 billion 10 years ago to $19 billion today.
So is that co-payment on or off?
The co-payment is still the subject of negotiations with the crossbenchers. We stand by it as good policy, and will continue to promote it.
In 2010, Mr Abbott couldn't win over the independents. Does that remain his biggest weakness, negotiation with the Senate?
Well, we've just got through our direct action plan, which people thought we wouldn't get through, $2.5 billion worth of measures, and Greg Hunt deserves to be congratulated there. Matthias Cormann did a great job with the mining tax and negotiating the abolition of that through the Senate. Erica Betts and Greg Hunt on the carbon tax. So we have had some wins in our deregulation space. We've got our omnibus bills through. Look, it's a case-by-case basis in the Senate. No doubt losing Jackie Lambie, Eliza, from the Palmer United Party to being an independent makes our task more difficult, because we need 6 out of those 8 independents to get our legislation through. So, there's no beating around the bush. It is tough work in the Senate, but it's a case-by-case proposition. We'll continue to promote good policy because we believe that's what we were elected to do, and that's also what the Australian people expect us to do.
So, Josh Frydenberg, just finally, are you looking at this result in Victoria as a good lesson in that obviously it's happened there, a one-term government? There's no reason perhaps that this could not happen to your own government?
Look, we believe we will be elected at the next federal election because of our record and because of our forward-looking agenda. But certainly in Victoria, this result is a wake-up call, and there is work to do. And certainly, Dennis Napthine, who can hold his head high, and the coalition strategists will look at the result more deeply over the coming days and try to take whatever lessons there are to be learned from it, because we want to come back to power both in Victoria and maintain power federally.
Josh Frydenberg in Melbourne, thank you very much for making time for us this morning.
Great to be with you. Thank you.